Great to see you here today. Thank you for braving the terrible weather we've had to make it here to this beautiful setting. I'm Victoria Hughes. I'm from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And today, hold on to your seats because we're going to travel forward in time. So this should have come with an advance warning. We're going to travel to the future to 2040 and visit York in the future and look at how it's different from now. So you're probably thinking, why are we doing this? Joseph Rowntree Foundation, anti-poverty organisation. Imagination and hope are really important for our work. So they're key ingredients in thinking about how we deliver our mission, which is to speed up and support the transition to a more equitable and just future that's free from poverty for people and planet. I can't believe I've just remembered that mission. I need a round of applause for that. That was quite long. So I'd like to introduce you to my fellow time travellers here today. Lovely to have a all-women panel here. So I'm going to start with Rachael Maskell, who I'd like to introduce. Rachael is the MP for York Central and has been since 2015. Rachael's work in York focuses on the real living wage, skilled jobs, sustainable city, affordable housing, integration of health and social care, and many, many other things which we'll hear about today. Great to have you here, Rachael. Thanks so much for coming. I'd also like to introduce Maria Bryant. Maria is Professor for Public Health, Nutrition, based at University of York and the Bradford Institute of Health Research. She's a nutritionist with over 20 years experience in the design and delivery of trials and research around food, with particular interest in food insecurity, early years and school food settings, which we'll hear about soon. And last but certainly not least, we've got Dr. Hannah Barham-Brown. Hannah is a GP registrar in Yorkshire, a governor of the Motability Foundation and former deputy leader of the UK Women's Equality Party. Alongside her clinical and political work, she travels widely to give talks around diversity, sexuality and disability, and was named as one of the Shaw Trusts on the Power List for the Shaw Trust as one of the 100 most influential disabled people in the UK. So what a lineup. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So in a moment, I'm going to ask my panelists, as I say, to take us into the future, to 2040, to look around the streets of York, tell us what they can see and hear as they move to the future. We're going to have then a panel discussion around those visions, looking at whether there are themes that link across. And then afterwards, we're going to have a short Q&A session with the audience. So get your imaginations going and please think of some questions that you'd like to ask the panel as we go through. Before we get going, I just want to start with a quote from a brilliant writer, Gloria Steinem, just to kind of set the scene and get us going. So she says, "Without leaps of imagination or dreaming, we lose the excitement of possibilities. Dreaming, after all, is a form of planning." So let's all get dreaming and planning. And let's start, if I can, with Rachael. If you could talk us through your vision for York in 2040, please.
Remember that stench of urine and those splashes of vomit along the pavement as we fought our way through those party mobs to get home as they were off to Airbnb Central. Well, the big tent came to town and things changed. Now, everywhere I go, I hear the birds chirping down the streets and children laughing as they dart around the snickerways and squares, leading to in York's family-friendly city, world-leading in its design. The flowers blooming are intoxicating along our streets, and the water features on Parliament Street. Well, children splashing and laughing alongside the dogs, and parents just taking a moment under those trees, relaxing and chatting with people from across the world, seeing what we can do. Every street is bursting with the independents, pop-ups and startups as part of the Grow Your Own Business project that we took on. Micro-business exploding everywhere, not least above the shops, and our creative studios are dotted around the lanes. If you stayed back tonight, you would hear the folk, the jazz, the salsa and local bands in every niche in the city, and I dare say be dancing too. In the Children's Quarter, everything is child-friendly, free for families, as the streets buzz with local families doing whatever they can, exploring, on the trails and tours and finding those little nooks and places to play and clambering on quite a lot too. Not least in the play areas around the Minster. Yeah, that's where those big tents were. Or going to the live theatre and cinema at the back of the art gallery. And of course, next to the library, we have our outdoor learning lab. I first called for Family Friendly York 23 years ago, and now we're seeing the fruit. As I walk over Lendal Bridge for people just to cycle, walk and wheel, I head towards the walls. I take a moment going up onto those walls as I look back on the UNESCO World Heritage City that we were. I fought for that more or less from the day I got elected. I also get that waft of chocolate in the air. We're still a chocolate city. York Central speaks to our values. Those luxury flats never appeared. Instead, jobs for a sustainable planet, giving everyone dignity and a decent wage. As I always said, we should be the gateway to the north. When we talk equal pay, we mean it here in York, and have proved that businesses, when they redistribute their wealth, everyone's skills are valued and productivity booms. The Minister gave us that funding for Bio Yorkshire in the end, delivering UK's greatest Green New Deal, green collar jobs for a green generation, cracking global challenges. The power, and I have to say the funding, from that small investment to the digital creative sector in York is springing unique talent across the world. The things that made the difference, is that we would focus creativity on sustainability, green gaming, driving young people to be the green entrepreneurs and activists, the green media, now the leading news channel telling the story of our planet's response to mitigation. And it's all about York anyway. And of course, our advanced and digital green transport accessible for all. The Biodome marks the centre of our climate university, a spin-off from York Higher, and a partnership with the universities from every single continent. This really made York a global city that we are today. The best academics in climate science undertaking the best research. Years of talk at COP, and who would have guessed York Central was now a global powerhouse for sustainability. But the thing that brought York Central to life was that decision to put the schools, including the Aspiration Academy, the former pupil referral unit, on that site. The kids with the greatest disadvantage surrounded by the most inspirational innovators. That's how we cracked the inequality challenge. The business obligation to never hire someone for what they have done. Just look at the potential within them. Needless to say, it unlocks significant talent and productivity, innovation and creativity. In 2023, when we decided to turn the Human Rights City into the Human Rights Action City, things just changed. I pushed for that pilot to employ asylum seekers in York. Smart move. It powered our economy. Now the diversity of York is vibrant, like in the Roman times, all unified because we're stronger in our common endeavour. And one of my goals was to see York's International Music Festival launch, bringing the old city and new together. I know we need more venues, but it really has made the city alive with music. The venues are never out of use. As I said at the time, school performances, the conservatoire, and of course the best of brass. The streets are just full of music, from the dawn chorus to the talent spots, something for all. Nothing more stimulating than when we hold our national climate youth parliaments in the concert halls on York Central, now in its 10th year, putting Westminster to shame, but determining the Youth Climate Action Lab's agenda. Later this year, we'll open the Global Climate Youth Parliament here in York. And of course, a good bit of climate action too, because Labour did scrap that draconian Public Order Act. And as I pop onto the riverboat out to Acombe, it has changed. Every part of York now has strong community hubs where the reciprocity of neighbours really builds strong communities. And the multi-agency oversight of every quarter in York has really been the heart of the project. But the infrastructure brought out by the university's pilots in Westfield has made York one of the most exciting places to live and work, now of course replicated in Town Hall and Clifton. The buses and active travel routes are great around the suburbs, connecting our garden villages. Everyone has a good home of their own, all with gardens, and of course strong communities too. I did get that city farm I talked about so often, run by Maskell and Bryant in the heart of York. Of course, it's always buzzing with children who just adore it. So do I. But so do the groups who have challenges and mental health challenges. They're not in the hospitals anymore. No, they're out in our community because our city really does care for one another. After Labour took over in 2024, the waiting list in the NHS, of course, disappeared, and the NHS is in better shape. It's all public health these days, helping us on a healthier journey, not least with the walking and running routes, with landmarks to distract you on your way so you can get round. They also connect Clifton and Roundtree Park's Lidos, as the ones along the routes along the river never flood anymore, because we got that upper catchment work done and that barbaric grouse moor shooting was outlawed. And of course, the tansy beetle's still the jewel of York. I know I dreamed in 2015 when I first got elected, and at that big tent event, you remember, but I went back on those speeches, and 25 years on, I think I can now move on to my next plans.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rachael. I don't want to come back to 2023. Can we just stay in 2040, please? I think you've cracked it. You've nailed it. Thank you so much. We're going to move on now. If Maria, you wouldn't mind giving your vision.
That'd be hard to follow, isn't it? Okay. I'm actually going to go into our schools, the school food systems, and I've called this my what if school. So I'll start by saying, what if schools were able to ignite love and curiosity of food by children? Just imagine. And funding and policies allow school leaders to not just spend all of their day fighting fires and thinking about assessments, and not even just to think about the school food that's provided, but to think about the whole vision of school food across the whole of the school day. So children have plenty of time in this school to really enjoy their food and their lunch. They get excited about sharing their food with their friends, and they know quite a lot about food as well. The schools are able to teach them not just about food, but with food, and they know where their food comes from. Now, you might think back to your own school meals. Now, were they delicious? Because these what if schools, the food is delicious. So it's locally grown. Some of it's grown in the grounds of the schools themselves. Now, where does it come from? So, of course, these the organisations and the caterers that procure or purchase the foods, they're not doing it for a profit and nothing related to cost. They're doing it because it's high quality, it's tasty, and it's good for the planet. And that is the primary focus of our procurers. Here's the most important thing. Every child in every school gets this for free. So there's no cost to families, and there's no need for families to submit applications. So families in greatest needs have the same as all of the other families without having to do anything. And when the children arrive, there's food there for them as well. So everyone is able to start the school day with nice, full bellies. Can you imagine? Now, this is an exercise for you. What I want you to do is think about what you think a school food canteen looks like, feels like, and smells like. Okay? How many of you are thinking about your favourite restaurant now, or your favourite cafe? Okay. How many of you are probably resembling something closer to a prison canteen? Okay, just hold that thought. So in our what if school, of course, it's going to be more like a restaurant. Okay, so it's going to be your whatever you imagine your best restaurant to be. But the other role that the schools in our what if school is going to play is that they're going to be environmentally friendly. So there's going to be safe, clean water fountains in every room. And children are going to have an opportunity to get this using recyclable, reusable bottles, which are provided to them, by the way. Now, remember, all of the school food is delicious, really tasty, so there's not going to be any food waste. So I'm not going to throw any food in the bin at all. How do we know that they're going to do that they're going to love that? Well, in our what if school, we've listened to the children and we've asked them, actually, what do you want? What would you like to eat? And the voices of children. Oh, go on then. Thank you. Excuse me. The voices of the children in our what if schools is forefront. So they support the decision making in the schools. I am going to have to sort of bring you back to what's happening now for a bit before we move on to the future. And and what I will begin by saying is there are absolutely pockets of this already happening. There are some brilliant schools, some brilliant organisations and some brilliant people all really working hard to make our What If school something possible. However, 25% of children in England suffer from food insecurity every day. It's about 4 million children every day going hungry. Of these, about half of them get free school meals. And the big sort of reason why many of them don't is the system that requires them to access free school meals. One being the terribly, terribly stringent criteria on eligibility. So you may or may not know that families can only earn up to £7,400 annual household income a year to be eligible for free school meals. And then, of course, there's all of the hassle of and the shame and the stigma associated with the application process. But our What If school isn't going to do that. Our What If school is going to provide free school meals for all. It's going to bring ideas of health, welfare and planetary sustainability together. Now, remember that 30% of a child's diet comes in their school day. About the same proportion, by the way, about 30% of climate change is caused by the food system. So really, really important, our What If schools. I have to say, we know a lot. The researchers, such as myself and lots of other people, have unfortunately witnessed whole plates of food being thrown in the bin. I personally have seen this. We know that thousands and thousands of plastic bottles, are thrown in the bin every day within schools. Some of those come from vending machines that we still have in our secondary schools. And unfortunately, we hear again and again of children waiting for most of their lunchtime in a queue, mostly in secondary schools, only to get to the front and there not being anything left that they want to eat. In our What If school, though, it's the senior leaders and the schools that are provided the time, the resources and enabling our policies to make this a reality. So that the canteens do look less like prison canteens. So it's certainly not the fault of the schools. They're busy, competing priorities. They've got the burden of their shoulders of building back better. And of course, that means the children have to do well in their assessments. This is not beyond the realms of possibility, by the way. We have seen this in other places. So countries like Japan and Sweden are experts at this. They do actually work with young people to design their spaces to look more like restaurants. And we are working really hard to try to make this happen and to evaluate its impact, bringing together lots of people. But we need buy-in from policy, we need time, we need resources, and we need long-term commitment that falls outside of short-term political agendas. So that we do have a school where children's right to food is recognised. And we do have not only free school meals in our What If school, but the funding that's associated with free school meals happens automatically. Okay, this is not something that any individual family has to do. And really importantly, children have a voice in all of this. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Maria. And, you know, I'd love to talk in a moment about how we change that from a what if to what is, because as you say, you know, some of this, it's not a utopian vision. This all feels like it should be kind of within our grasp. So thanks so much. And I'd like to ask you, Hannah, if you could share your vision after Rachael and Maria's. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm particularly excited to come to York in 2040 and have a roll around, because back in 2023, getting into York and rolling around was pretty damn impossible. So I've heard it's a lovely city. I only live about 20 minutes away. I don't get to see very much of it very often. And we've done that via a range of methods by 2040. There are lots of exciting projects that have happened. So firstly, there are some anti-terrorism barriers, you might remember, really big things over some of the roads you can get your car through. We've realised that they're not a very good way of managing terrorism and replaced them with lovely planters that can just swing out of the way at the swipe of a blue badge or a taxi pass and open again. So nobody's reliant on a random guy who may or may not be there to open the anti-terrorism barriers, whether I'm coming through in a wheelchair or a car. It's amazing. It makes a difference. And you continue to see that green from those planters that are full of edibles, by the way, because, you know, edible York. Anyone heard of edible York? Right, if you haven't, you've got homework. Go and find Edible York and volunteer. It's a phenomenal organisation. I'll talk more about it. But as you can swing through these barriers, you see this green kind of theme continuing, because every single business in York has been financially incentivised to take on green credentials. So all of them are contributing to the new Edible York Community Composting Project. If they make coffee and sell coffee, those grounds are fed straight back in and collected and put into the community compost beds. Can you tell I'm obsessed by my allotment at the moment? Absolutely obsessed. And that each business has been supported to get solar panels and has got planters on the windowsills or at least out the back. None of them have seats outside that are blocking pavements. If you can't get a double buggy down that pavement, then you can't have those chairs outside. It's that simple. And people can, as a result, access those spaces. And the shops sell minimum in-season vegetables because Edible York has taken over. I get very confused because in Leeds we have Incredible Edible. So these are projects which are community growing spaces. So they're basically kind of shared allotments, but in raised planters, and anyone can volunteer to grow stuff and anyone can come and pick stuff. Now, I live in a village in 2023 that is full of these planters. I can't remember the last time I bought spinach or chard or lettuce. I just pop out and get it. And that is what York is looking like in 2040. You can go and pick your seasonal veg, reducing your air miles, and it's grown by the community for the community. It's really exciting and very healthy, and the GP in me is delighted in this. So we have pavements with drop curbs everywhere. You've never seen one of those tiny yellow ramps of doom in York ever again. They were banned in 2025. So we're not reliant on whether or not drunken people will break them as to whether or not we're able to get onto a pavement as a disabled person. It's fabulous. All businesses are going to be accessible through a community ramps project. Some of them will have ramps built out of Lego. This is a thing. Google Lego ramps. There are community groups around the world that build tiny ramps into shops from Lego. They're very sturdy. They last years. And you can even make them with like metal Lego, so it's less plastic. We can be really innovative about this. But every single one has steps. And never again, for the last 15 years, have I heard the words, oh, well, it's a listed building. The House of Lords is a listed building. I had a lovely coffee in there 2 days ago with another wheelchair-using peer. It was that easy. If we can make these buildings accessible, we can make the shops of York accessible. There are changing places, toilets. In 2023, there were only 3 changing places toilets in the city centre. There are now at least 10, including one in York Minster. There are quite a few in the House of Lords, I'm just saying. A changing places toilet is one where there is an adult-sized changing table with a hoist. So if you are a hoist-dependent wheelchair user, and in 2023 there were 250,000 of us, if you are a hoist-dependent wheelchair user, you can use the toilet. Again, you would think this would have happened by 2023, but it's taken till 2040 and we now have them, and it's terribly exciting. And of course, GPs have taken over the world. I'm joking, we haven't, but our surgeries are now the centre of the community. So a GP surgery is never just a building anymore. A GP surgery has a library associated with it. So as a doctor, I can prescribe my patients books they might find helpful that they're not going to have to go and spend 20 quid on, because books about health tend to have a slightly higher markup. Pop into Waterstones, it's really depressing. There are nurseries and childcare facilities where NHS staff can drop their children, reducing the gender pay gap in the NHS. Yeah, I was always going to get the gender pay gap in here somewhere, and I managed it. We have gardening spaces in surgeries where we can teach kids where healthy food comes from. There are youth clubs, and we have fully funded sexual health services. So York has very little in the way of sexually transmitted infections anymore. And if there is no stigma about turning up and getting some support with that. Transport in York has completely changed through the creation of a community accessible transport infrastructure with wheelchair accessible EV, electrical vehicle minibuses that can fit more than one wheelchair or one pushchair on them at any time, because lo and behold, and shockingly, it turns out that sometimes wheelchair users have kids that also need transporting. And we finally clocked that. And no longer will wheelchair users have to part from their friends or their family and get on a separate bus if they want to park and ride in, because there is plenty of space for them all. But these buses are regular and they can be hired out by community groups, and they're used during the day by these organisations with regular trips going into the city centre, so very few of us need to rely on our own vehicles. It's like a super accessible park and ride system. And in the evening, those buses can be used by the universities to get students safely home from their nights out, because we know that that's a real anxiety point for students and has been in the past. So when you look around York and you look at the people in York, the most important thing is that you see real diversity, because we all got together at the Big Tent Festival in 2023 and we really looked at the people that were surrounding us. We looked and considered the number of languages that were or were not being spoken. We looked around and considered the racial and ethnic makeup of those who were sitting around us at the Big Tent Festival in 2023. We looked at the number of people using mobility aids. We looked at the number of people having to fight just to get in to the Big Tent Festival in York in 2023. I may end up having a rant shortly. And we looked and we saw how many LGBTQ couples and families there were confidently holding hands and still beaming from the fact that York 2040's Pride Parade had been a parade and not needed to be a protest. We looked around and we saw that there was so much work to do on diversity, and by 2040 we made that happen.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I could speak all day about the kind of themes that are coming out. And I think one for me that we've heard from Maria and Hannah about is, as I said, after Maria, some of this isn't utopian, it's within reach. It's about accessibility, it's about diversity, and it's about people feeling safe and feeling fed. Some of this is basic human rights. So I think when we're thinking about 2040, it's not so we're not going to work on unicorns. This is like within our reach. There are other themes that have come out for me around biodiversity that are really strong, young people and the power of imagination there, which I think we'll come back to in a moment. And so I think there's a richness of themes across each of these visions. I just want to ask the panelists a couple of questions just to dig into those visions a little bit. And one is, what would it take to get there? So if we were to mess things up a little bit, positively disrupt, what would it take to get there? What are the opportunities and what are the challenges in York? And if I can start with Hannah this time, that would be great.
So, I've got a shopping list, but I'll try and keep it down to two things. Firstly, I think we need to consider who we prioritise as a city. And speaking to many people, I contested an election for Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner about 18 months, 2 years ago now, for North Yorkshire. And speaking to people, it felt very much like York was a city that was prioritising tourism and was prioritising tourists. And residents felt that. Residents felt that they didn't necessarily have the priority on community and community building in the city. And we know when we look at other cities where community and residents are prioritised, tourists then come because the whole feel of the city changes. So I think that's where we need to kind of shift our gaze, is how do we make this a city that is wonderful for the people who are here 24/7, 365? And then how does that draw people in? Because we've got the history, we've got the culture, we've got what tourists want to see. Now, how do we build the kind of infrastructure for the people that live here around that? And I think we also need to empower people to be disruptive. So we had a bit of an interesting episode trying to get in today, where, as a wheelchair user, parking had been arranged. But for me to access it, I was expected to be able to get out of my car, find a very small unlabeled intercom, press said intercom. A police person would be able to then come and open the gate for me. And because I couldn't easily do those things, and I didn't even know the intercom was there, I had to phone Victoria, who fortunately I had your number, and somebody was able to come and get me. And what really struck me was when that happened, another gentleman with a visible disability had come up to me and said, I've had to park around here because that's the only blue badge parking. There's quite a way away. I've hobbled around and I can't work out how to get in. And I said, well, that's okay because they're letting me in. So I'm sure you can come in this entrance with me. And I wish I'd put him in my car, because the response when we managed to get somebody to come and open the gate for me was, when he turned and said, oh, am I okay to come in, was, oh no, you're going to have to walk around the other side of the Minster to the main entrance. This is a visibly disabled older gentleman with a crutch, and the immediate response was, computer says no, system says no. So I think we need to foster a bit of an idea of asking forgiveness rather than permission sometimes, and empowering people as individuals to make basic decisions, because I feel like sometimes the systems we've created become bureaucratic to the point of obstructive, and that is what directly impacts the diversity of the audiences we see at events like this.
Thank you, Hannah. Anything you'd like to add, Maria or Rachel, around the opportunities and challenges to getting to those visions in 2040?
Well, first of all, I think we have to think about who is in the conversation, and constantly absent are many of the communities in York, and they've got to be brought into the centre of the conversation. And those people who live a life of disadvantage in York currently, who aren't in the big tent today, are the very people whose voices absolutely must be heard. And I would add to that children as well. Children are not the future, they are the now, and children are not the next generation, they are this generation, and we need to ensure that they have not only a listen to, but they have voice, power and agency to bring about the change that they want to see now and taken seriously. So I think instead of patronising children's voices, we've got to learn from children's voices. So we need to bring those voices together, because everyone has a vision for their future, and the reason hope is dying in so many people is because they're not allowed to dream and not allowed to have that agency and voice. So that is going to be absolutely crucial. But there is nothing to stop any of these things that we've heard said today from this platform happen. It all should. But the opportunities are there. So it's up to those in power to challenge back and say, are you willing? And I think along that journey, very much asking the question, instead of constantly examining with the question why, which I find the suppressive of politics, asking why not and making that so, and just getting out there and doing, because you can always start with the small things, the pilots and the opportunities are there. And I believe that we could really pull that opportunity, which Hannah and, we heard about, your experiences just today, that should never, ever happen. So we've got to challenge. And some of that may take some activism, but that's okay, because we need to ensure that our power counts.
Well, I will actually start with a bit of optimism, and that is that in York, there is a commitment for free school meals. Yeah. And it will start with a pilot, because it's not easy. We don't have necessarily all the same kind of funding as what other London boroughs have here, so I think that's really positive. We also spend lots and lots of time talking to children and young people, finding out what they think's most important. Now, we've done this with over 300 children and young people, and we asked them, what would you do around school food if you were in charge, if you could do anything? Okay, so we weren't putting words into their mouths. Guess what they said? Does anyone want to shout something? Not you, Annie, you know the answer. It wasn't burgers every day, although that did come up, of course. Genuinely, the most frequently stated thing that children wanted was free school meals for all children, and we were blown away when we saw that. So I think you're absolutely right. I said we're not just listening to them as a token; they absolutely have a very important voice in this. What I will say, and this is a note of caution, is that, and I talk about this a lot with with my nutritionist hat on and with health is that individual choices are not to be blamed for some of the problems that we have here. And actually, my kind of goal really is to make opportunities, particularly in schools, so that senior leaders have the time. Time comes up again and again. Have the time to dedicate to doing all of the other things. Food, of course, is my baby. I'm interested in that. There's lots of other things that schools could be doing, and many of them are, but most of them are very much constricted with this Build Back Better and need for constantly assessing children and young people. So, yeah, so I mean, I know it's a bit predictable, but I want new policies and lots of funding.
Thanks, Maria. And I think, you know, there is something really important about that time, the time for all of us to think and imagine. You know, a lot of that's been sucked out of everybody's kind of daily life in terms of how we work. It's always the next thing. It's always urgent, urgent, urgent. So I think, you know, one plea for people today is think about, you know, when we talk about children, imagination comes very naturally. How can all of us kind of exercise that muscle a bit more in thinking things don't have to be the way that they are. You know, as we've heard from all of the panelists, there are some things we could pick up now and write a manifesto for York and do these things. They're all very practical things. So yeah, use that muscle of imagination. It's really, really important. And just while we talk about children and young people, I just want to make a plug. In the marquee from about 12:20, we're going to have some amazing artwork from students from Tang Hall School who have drawn how they want York to look in 2040. And as Maria says about imagining the future in terms of food, it isn't all kind of Barbie dream houses, although I think there is a bit of that. And we were talking earlier about maybe that would be a nice addition as long as it was accessible in York. But there are some really practical things. And actually, some of the things the kids have drawn, you'll see, some of it's very imaginative. Other things are very practical. So they talk a lot about the environment, about litter, about things that they just don't like. So I think there's something about listening to children, not patronising them, but actually acting on some of this stuff. So please have a look at the artwork. The other thing they've done, which is fab, is created a video game showing York. So they've taken some of their pictures and created this video game of York. And I was a bit blown away by the imagination of children, but also it made me feel quite old thinking about how easily they grasp the technology. So I think thinking about the future, thinking about how children imagine, but also grasp new technology in a way that, you know, I find staggering. You know, we need to place more emphasis, I think, there on their voices. So yeah, please have a look at that artwork. Just aware of time, and I would like to open up to the audience to ask a few questions. So I said earlier, if please use your imaginations to think of some questions. Don't know if we've got a mic. We've got someone here, please, and then we'll take 3 and then see if we've got another round. So can we do the person here, and then we'll go to the person here, and then did you have your hand up? Thanks. And then we'll come to you on the next round if that's right.
Hello, thanks. I've loved this. This is exactly what I like to think about all the time. So we did an event for York Design Week a couple of years ago, and this was the exact same title, in fact. And you're right, it's the exact same themes that were coming up. We were on the high street in Acomb, asking particularly children, because they were the easiest to get involved, to draw how they would imagine this high street in the year 2040, and coming up with just the same themes and more. And so it's really good. I'm really happy to say that I think this is 2030 that you're describing, and by 2040 we're going to be well beyond that. Actually, it's all doable. It's also doable, and it would be make such a difference. But what I see as an interesting challenge on how we do this is because we start to get very ambitious, which is great. And then when you get more ambitious, you have to start changing things and making potential trade-offs. In the positive, you get something much better out of it, but change is a big thing. How do we make democracy enable that? How do we make it more precise in understanding what do people value and want, and what trade-offs are they happy to see? Because saying which party you like the least every 4 years doesn't get you onto the specific issue. I'm aware they're doing very interesting things in Taiwan with participatory democracy, so that's partly where I'm going. Thanks.
Great question, thank you.
Thank you. I'm David Harborne. I'm from York Centre for Voluntary Service. And in terms of how we do this, one of the big issues is that public providers tend to have a great idea and then they consult on it in a way that's predetermined. We now have in York a Poverty Truth Commission where we start with no preconceptions whatsoever. We start with citizen commissioners who have experience of living in poverty, past or present. They are helped to develop as a group to understand each other before they even start to express to the civic commissioners what it is they want us to do and what they want us to stop doing. Now, if that's not a difficult principle to grasp, but it's time consuming. But it is the way forward. One of my other passions is building on yesterday's references to Joe Cox, loneliness, which is an epidemic. And it's part of the strategic objectives of York Centre for Voluntary Service to work with the entire community to tackle loneliness. Well, we're not going to come up with the ideas. We have to work with people who have the experience, who can tell us what we should do and what we should not do. We have to make sure that that is how we get to 2040, by listening to the people with that experience.
Totally agree. And yeah, if we can take one more, and then I think we'll have time for one more afterwards, if that's right.
I think I should be rather optimistic if I actually get to 2040, because I should be 100 that year. You're all invited. So I was thinking, 2040, all these things to do with transport, everything like that, will get more and more important for me. At the moment, I can walk up the road, get on the bus, come into York, do what I do, and then go back on the bus. But probably not for much longer. It's getting more and more difficult to get on the bus. However, I've thought of one thing that really is so easy. It's trees. Now, a lot of people seem to be keen on trees, and then you put the television on and councils are cutting down swathes of them, which is heartbreaking to me. And I don't want York to cut down all the trees in Parliament Street. And it's no good saying, oh, they won't. They cut them down in the night if they're going to, and you stand no chance. I put this into practice. When my husband died, we decided we'd put his ashes under a tree. And we did this, and it was an olive tree for climate change. And other people now, where we put it, are going to do that as well. So it's not a sort of headstone or anything like that. I haven't got anything written on it, but there will be a little copse, of trees. And when you look round, it's not bad here. But there are parts of York which could really do with a tree. And this is where the children could come in. If they walk to school or whatever they do, we could have a tree there. And it could be a sort of competition if you want, to see what schools do. But that would be York in 2040 for me. Anyway, a little simple thing like that.
Lovely, thank you. Great idea. And Billy Desheen, I don't know if he's here, who spoke earlier, was talking about exactly that they're doing in Grimsby. So planting trees in Grimsby, communities getting involved, it's having an amazing effect. So you're definitely onto something there. So we've had a couple of great questions. I'm going to open it up to the panelists to take your pick on any of those. I mean, I think there's shout off the gongs. I think there's a definite theme about participation, and I love the question about democracy and how do we make change within democratic systems from a participation perspective. But I think there is also something practical about, some of this is, again, within reach, it's maybe 2030 rather than 2040. How do we get on with some of these practical changes? So I'm not sure who wants to go, but if you want to jump in.
Thank you. So in terms of democracy and how it enables autonomy, I mean, personally, I'm going to say we need to consider our voting systems because we know that our current voting system actually doesn't do much in terms of diversity in representation, whereas I would like to see us move to something like proportional representation, where actually we know more smaller parties can get through, and that tends to encourage a more diverse range of elected people. But at the same time, I think we also need to not expect people to put themselves forward for election to be able to feed in to systems, because actually I've done it a few times and it's bloody daunting, and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of capacity. And if I was, you know, from a different ethnic minority background, or if I had kids, or I didn't have a supportive partner or a very supportive party, then that would not have been an option for me, and that shouldn't be the case. The systems we work in currently really quell diversity to too large an extent. So I think we need to take some of the pressure off people from putting themselves forward for election and think about more things like citizens' assembly type models, which we've seen really effective. You know, that's how things like the change around abortion legislation in Northern Ireland came about, was through citizens' assemblies. So there is a lot of power in how we can bring people into their community and kind of give them buy-in. And sometimes, yeah, that is going to require funding, and actually saying, look, here is some funding that community groups can apply for. What can we do, and how do we advertise that? So I think there's a lot on that in terms of how we increase that diversity of voices that we hear. I'm really pleased that the lady over there mentioned that as a community ages, the need for access increases. And I don't think it shocks anyone to say, when we look around the population of York, we do, in comparison to some other areas of the UK, have an older population in this city. So we should, if anything, be thinking more about accessibility and infrastructure around that, because we're going to need it more and more as the future rolls along. And I will finally put in a plea for, yes, more trees. Can we make them fruit trees, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, deliberative democracy does have its power, and when people are drawn from different communities and work together, the outcomes are incredible. And I was just this week at look at the People's Plan for Nature in Parliament, and just listening to the people who are on that commission and the journey that they went through, because it isn't just about kind of influencing change, it's about changing yourself through a process as well. And that was an incredibly powerful experience. So I think there is great opportunity, but also when we are looking at plans, people have got to be included in their area. And I think one of the things that I've particularly observed in my time in Power in the City is that so many people are excluded from processes. And when those voices are raised, they're ignored. And that has got to end. It's not sustainable. And of course, people are locked out because of those processes. And particularly value the point you make around people who experience loneliness, because it is an epidemic out there, but we never know about it because people that are lonely are not integrating into our conversations. And that is, it is painful for those people because they don't have a space. So we absolutely have got to look at how we have stronger communities and enable neighbourliness as well to help people connect, because we all want to connect. That's the very nature of who we are, and our connections as well with nature through the generations. I love trees myself, and when I think about, you know, even look at these trees here, they were there before we were born, they'll be there after we died, and that real connection with nature. So I think it's a fabulous suggestion you've brought forward.
I would just very quickly add, but from a different perspective, because I'm an academic. So it's a positive message as well, I think, and that is over recent-ish years, there's been an absolute push for government to fund research to inform evidence that includes the voices of other people and relevant stakeholders. And actually, quite honestly, we should not be putting funding into anything other than that. So if a research proposal comes in that doesn't consider the needs of the key stakeholders and beneficiaries, it shouldn't be funded. So I think that's a positive thing, and we do it. I'm really happy. We now do it as part of our day job. I guess that's a plug as well. You know, if you want to be involved in research, you know, don't be scared.
Thanks, Maria. I'm really sorry because we're not going to have time for another question. I'm getting the 5-minute warning from someone. We're going to close the session soon. I just wanted to ask each of the panelists to talk about hope. So we started off talking about imagination and hope, and just for them to say briefly, what is the thing that brings them hope? So to send us on our way on this lovely Saturday afternoon, what's a key thing that gives them hope about the future?
So I think in terms of York specifically, my heart was warmed when, you know, in the recent local council elections, we saw the disability community really come together and say, we're not happy and we're not going to accept that we're locked out of this city anymore. And that gave me hope, because it is so hard on so many levels as disabled people to be able to come together and find your community on a practical level, on a mental and emotional level. But the determination of that group to go, no, this isn't good enough, and we are going to campaign for change. Whether or not you agreed with all of their methods, I think it's so powerful, because it gives everyone a message of, you know what, if there's something you don't like, you can go out and you can make a change. And I can't get into the city yet, and I am going to continue to keep fighting until I can. But I think that does really give hope, because it was a case of a lot of people saying, we're not going to go for this. We are going to be asking forgiveness rather than permission a little bit. And we're not going to accept this. System says no, computer says no, ridiculous report says no. We're going to keep pushing back because it's our city too. And that really brought me hope recently.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Maria?
Yeah, this is really hard given what I said about the stock statistics in terms of children going hungry. But I feel like we are in the worst situation that we've ever been in that respect at the minute. But with that, over the last, recent years, I feel like there is a momentum bubbling, building, and we are actually moving in the right direction. And I'll come back to the free school meals piece again for that, and children's right to food. You'll see in the press that now the mayor has introduced free school meals for all children in London. We, like I said before, we don't necessarily have that ability to do that straight away, but there is definitely momentum building, and I genuinely feel like it's going to happen, but we just have to really keep at it.
Power will change, and the places you look for power will change, and it's young people in this city that really do give me hope, because as you understand the power that you have and use that power and to make demands and see through those changes, things will move. So we don't have to have a dependency on a very paternalistic system, which we have been forced to live in. We can just get on and do. And I think the more we understand our power, the more hope I have.
Lovely. Thank you, everybody. And it goes back to the quote I think I said at the beginning about dreaming and planning. So how are we all going to take some of the things we've heard from today and think about actually how we dream of those and how we actually get on and plan, so that when we run another session, actually we're not talking about the same things. Things have moved on in the city. So I want to say thank you, everybody. Thanks so much to my amazing panellists for coming and speaking today and taking us on that trip to 2040 in York. As I say, it's hard to come back from there to 2023, but we can make these things happen. Thank you to all of you for coming along and asking such amazing questions. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to end on a quote. I love a quote to send us on our way. So this is from an amazing writer called Rebecca Solnit. If you don't know her, please look her up. She's fab. And she says, a place is a story and stories are geography. We need empathy and an active imagination, a storyteller's art to allow us to travel from here to there to new possibilities. Thanks, everybody.